Greenpoint, Williamsburg Public Affairs presentation. This is Neighborhoods Today. Welcome to Neighborhoods Today. I'm Dick Mahon, and today our guest is Jack Elick, artist, cartoonist, and former art director for Associated Press. Jack, welcome to Neighborhoods Today.
Thank you, Dick. It's a real pleasure to be here.
You know, I'm so happy you're here because I've been a cartoon fan all my life. And you're the perfect guy to ask this question of, is that they had this Kilroy was here, was a cartoon, and I always thought that that was some kid who had sort of scratched it on the wall, and it just sort of was a fad and took off. Do you know any of the history about Kilroy was here?
Oh, sure, Dick. It started right after the war. Second World War started, and we started to churn out these Liberty ships, and right around the Boston area, where one of the bigger shipyards were. They were completing these ships, finishing them off, ready to send them out to either the Atlantic or the Pacific. And one of the inspectors on board, who inspected all the fittings, inspected all the material supply, was a guy named Kilroy. And he was very good at his job. He was fantastic. And everything that he would okay and say, this is fine, this is all right, why, he would draw this little cartoon guy, a cartoon of a fellow looking over a fence,
Right.
And he would write Kilroy was here.
It was like a stamp of approval.
That was his name, right, yeah. And so it went out on everything. And as the ships got out, people got to see it. Not only that, but even the supply boxes, the carts, he would write Kilroy was here. So that when they were unloaded at port, the soldiers, sailors, Marines used to see this. They got the biggest kick out of it. Well, they just went with it. After a while, they just start scrolling it on their Jeeps, on their equipment, on the bombed-out buildings that they went through. Everything was Kilroy was here.
Oh, boy.
And it got to capture everybody's imagination.
It was all over. It was all over.
Sure.
I never knew how
Founded in truth. Right.
Oh, right. That's very interesting. Tell me something about cartoons. I've always been interested in the fact that cartoons have a real sudden type of impact on you. If you tell somebody a joke, you laugh, and the other guy laughs along with you. But sometimes if you're looking at a cartoon, whether you're in a bus or you're at the library and you're running through a cartoon, and it just hits you, sometimes I thought they'd throw me out of the library because the impact of that humor is just so wonderful.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about cartoons and tell me what these do and what's the magic of making a cartoon.
Well, of course, I think the magic is the double whammy, you know, and I think very often the old vaudeville comics had that double whammy. It was not only the material that's funny, but it's the way you present it. And with a cartoonist, it's a funny gag, but it's the zany nature of the character, it's the zany nature of the background. So it's the old proverbial 1-2 shot that gets you. One in the stomach, one in the head, and it makes it really great.
That's
really
so
fun.
good.
Yeah.
I know that you're a cartoonist and that you've had your cartoons published in a number of magazines.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And we're just going to talk about the cartoons. I'd love to see them. I want to see them. And we'll hold some of the other aspects of your art experience. Okay. But I'd love to really get into the cartoons.
Okay.
I hope you brought some with you so that we're going to take a look at them and maybe you'll explain some of them.
I've got a few.
Wonderful.
Sure. Listen, we often think of, gee, there are really two kinds of cartoons. There are the ones with the captions underneath.
Oh, yeah.
And the ones with just the drawing.
Yes.
And, of course, the toughest ones are the ones with just the drawing. And these are the ones that I think most cartoonists strive for because, among other things, they're international, Dick. I mean, if you've got a caption with the gag underneath, why, if it goes out to Bolivia or Germany or Japan, they're lost. Nobody knows it. But if you just have that funny drawing that has the gag right there,
It's international.
It's international.
Oh,
sure.
so-
Can I give you an example?
I always thought cartoons were sort of strictly American. I thought that they were sort of like, that they just came about during my time.
Oh, no. They started in many years ago. Probably the earliest cartoons were ancient times, medieval times, where whoever the ruling monarch happened to be, why the serfs, the people that are getting oppressed, would draw these little cartoons and puncture the king or puncture the prince.
You mean,
Yeah. And then it came over to this country where it was much more, I think, municipally oriented. If there was a question in government, dirty dealing, etc., the editorial cartoonist held high. You know? And people like, Thomas Nast. Remember the old days with Tammany Hall and Boss Tweed? He was accused of robbing hundreds of thousands of dollars from the city's coffers. There was a cartoonist always giving him the jab, always putting him on the hot seat.
That would be more of it would have more impact maybe than just an editorial, because you've got a picture which will stay in your mind. Plus you have a caption, to go along with that and make it more permanent for you and have more impact. Fascinating stuff.
And then after a while, these editorial cartoons created the cartoonist who just left the political aspect aside and just did it for the sheer humor. And that's when, people that you don't even know, early cartoon strips like The Yellow Kid and Crazy Cat, turn of the century cartoons that go way back. From that evolved other cartoons like Mutt and Jeff, Maggie and Jigs. There were so many.
Andy Grump and some of the other ones. We'd love to see some of your cartoons. Would you share something with us?
Sure. Well, again, the classic example of the one that's captionless and the one that has a caption. Let me give you an example, if I may. This is a captionless cartoon. It's it's typical. Everybody. We're all familiar with what goes on with that, and the hospitals really get a sticker in the car. And one with another captionless one. There goes fishing, and what does he come up with? He comes up with a screwdriver. But on the other hand, you have the ones with the captions, where this is my own little thing, where two female fish are on the bottom of the water with their little fish families, and one fish is saying, "Byron doesn't make a huge salary, but we managed to keep our heads below water."
I love that.
There are so many like that.
I love that stuff.
Them all.
So good. So interesting. Who are some of your favorite cartoonists? Those people that you enjoy, that you enjoy looking at?
Okay. It started off for me when I drew a three-legged cow on my mother's wallpaper. And I was justly rewarded on the backside. But then I really got to appreciate cartoons, the daily comic strips. People like Terry and the Pirates, by an artist called Milton Caniff, who was such a fine artist, illustrator, great. And I'm sure you remember, Dick, maybe when you were a kid, there was a cartoon strip called Prince Valiant.
Oh, yes. I think it's still running today.
Yeah, it's running with a different cartoonist now, because the one who came up with it died at the age of 80, so it's carried over. But the original cartoonist was so good. All the research and all these medieval clothing and, animals and marvelous story. So those are the two that I really loved and influenced. And then I found out that I had a pretty good sense of humor, so I started hitting off on the funny side rather than the more adventurous side.
Now, did you do any cartoons yourself? Did you actually work on a cartoon where you'd have one caption and tell a little story?
Well, I tried to peddle these to different syndicates. It's a very, very tough market. Even the gags I show you, Dick, you'd go once a week to a magazine, then a big magazine like Saturday Evening Post or Collier's, and you'd sign in, you see, for the cartoon editor to look at your work. And maybe 40, 50 guys would sign in. And those 40, 50 guys, Dick, would show 10 or 12 drawings to the cartoon editor, who may keep one or two for further consideration. So he's got 100 cartoons to look at, and there are seven being printed in the magazine. So the odds are enormous. That's
What does he do? He looks at something, and if he laughs real hard, he puts that aside.
And here's what the son of a guns used to do. They'd hate to have to show you that they thought it was funny.
I see.
So they'd look through my cartoons, and I'd have a big bunch of them, and inadvertently, one would really strike their fancy. And they'd go like this, and one that they thought was funny, they'd start smiling, and then he'd expanding his lip. He never wanted you to see that it was funny. Biting his lip, and I'll hold this one. Luckily, I did have a few sales. But it was very sporadic. It was like living the life of a gambler. You know, one day you're looking at $300 suits, the next day you're looking at $2 sports shorts.
Right.
So that's when I got a job with the Associated Press, got a job as staff artist there. It was a little bit more steady, and the work was still rewarding. It was doing my cartooning, and which I eventually got to be art director. And humorous story of when I got out of art school, Dick. I was 17 years old, couldn't afford an art college, and I went to the New York Daily News at the age of 17. And I said, what better way to start than hands-on in an art department? Daily News had some of the greatest artists in the world. So I filled out an application, personnel application, to be a copy boy in their art department. Imagine sitting there with Chester Gould, of Dick Tracy, and Zach Mosley.
How old were you at this time?
I was 17.
Oh, boy.
Filled out the application. They said, thank you, we'll let you know. I totally forgot about it. Korean War came along, joined the Air Force. Luckily, I got in under the GI Bill, went to an art college, got a job at AP. Dick, 14 years later, in 1964, I got a postcard in the mail saying, if you still want your job, copy boy in the news, come see John Clancy in the building.
Yeah.
Blah, blah. 14 years old.
But they kept it on file. 14 years.
All right, but I brought it to my editor at AP, and I said, if you can match this salary as copy boy, I'm going to, if you can, I'm going to take off. Don't worry, Jack, we'll match it.
Oh, that's a great story. That's a wonderful story.
14 years, Dick. It's a long time.
Yeah, that's stuff. You know, it's so interesting. And I'd like to mention your wife is also an artist.
Yeah, Betty is a fashion illustrator.
She's a fashion artist.
Right.
That's a little unusual. I don't know if it's unusual or not, but for artists to hook up together.
Yeah.
That's not a common thing.
No.
Did you meet her through the art world, or?
Not at all. It was the social strata. She was among the gals that we knew as young men, and that was one of the guys that she knew. We started dating after a while. And of course, I think the idea that we were both artists gave us a great deal to talk about.
Sure.
To feel in common.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And,
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, there's no conflict. She doesn't compete in your field,
No.
and you don't compete in her field.
If truth be told, she's a much better artist than I am. She's an artist of a more finer genre. You know, she does beautiful fashion illustrations. She does beautiful general illustrations. As a matter of fact, Dick, what we do is every Christmas time, we do our own Christmas card. And one year Betty will do the Christmas card, and next year I will draw the Christmas card. Betty usually incorporates the places that we go on vacation. You know,
Yeah.
She'll have a Christmas card like this using a sketch she made while we were on vacation. Then the next year I will do a funny one using a cartoon. The next year she will do another sketch on the Christmas card that we did on vacation. Then I will do a funny one.
Isn't that?
It's been that way for the last 38, 39 years.
Absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
That's great. So you do collaborate in a way.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, you do
Right.
collaborate in a way.
And we get marvelous advice from each other. It's nice to get an assignment and then having someone right there next to you, your partner, being able to go over and say, what do you think of this?
Oh,
Is there
that's
something,
right.
is there something wrong with this?
Right.
It's bugging me.
Right.
And invariably she'll say, yeah.
Right. Well, did she ever ask you for a little advice?
Oh, sure. She does. Now, whether she listens to me or not, I don't know. That's another question. But sure, she asks me.
Very good. You mentioned cartoons. Sometimes cartoons have just sort of like grown beyond the cartoon page. And there was like the Addams cartoons.
Right.
All right. And those were about ghostly and gaunt type of figures.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about that, because I know that became a show and so on.
Right. Well, Charles Addams started out many years ago as a steady New Yorker cartoonist, only he wasn't doing the macabre stuff then. He was doing general funny cartoons, board meetings, and people talking at a bar, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden he hit on this little deal where it got a little spooky and a little ghostly and ghastly, and people loved it. He got so much fan mail from it. Let's see more. Let's see more. And slowly but surely, that's all he did, and it became so far wide and so well read that aside from being very famous, he made himself a nice little fortune doing it, because these guys that work or draw for New Yorker, Dick, are under contract. You know.
You mean, so they're not like freelance?
No.
Those guys are on the
They sign
payroll.
a contract to make X amount of money per year, and for that X amount of money, I will give you 25 cartoons a year.
Ah.
And believe you me, it's a very handsome fund, which I'm sure has escalated over the years. So that, as you mentioned, Charles Addams was not only a cartoonist, he was sort of a socialite. He used to be invited to all these fancy balls,
sure,
and he
he was
knew
a
politicians in New
celebrity.
York. He knew the movie stars.
Yes, yeah.
And as you started to mention, they adapted his work into the movies, and he got royalties from that, and became a very, very famous guy.
Oh, yeah.
Very prolific.
Right. There were so many. You know, sometimes many cartoons that I remember have started out on the printed page and then have gone into either a movie series or a television series. And I think of Little Abner.
Right.
Was a possibility.
Yeah.
And Little Orphan Annie was another one.
That's right.
Okay, and they made a movie out of that.
Right.
So there are so many things that come out of this creative well
Yeah.
that the cartoonist has,
Right.
and it just sort of like explodes and
Right.
just goes
Not
up.
only movies, Dick, but if you made the Broadway stage as well.
That's right, yeah.
So you're right, it becomes very lucrative for the cartoonist. I think Chick Young, who did Blondie back in the 40s and 50s. I think,
Edward Bumstead.
oh yeah, they must have made
great.
about 10 of those Blondie movies.
Oh, yeah.
They all started with
Right, how about, was it Henry Aldrich or Andy Hardy? Did that start out as a cartoon?
I don't think so. I
No,
don't think
okay.
so.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking of Henry Aldrich.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Henry Aldrich.
Right, yeah.
Right. But that's right, so many of them had just sort of exploded into movies or television.
Right,
So
yeah.
good, tremendous field.
Yeah.
So how is the field today competitively for a cartoonist?
Well, to be honest, Dick, it's gotten rougher over the years. The magazines in general have dwindled. When I was selling my cartoons, I mean, we used to go to maybe 20 magazines, I should say, a week, just peddling our wares.
Right.
But now it's dwindled down. I mean, the magazines that use cartoons, I can think of the New Yorker, I can think of Playboy, Penthouse. Reader's Digest, I think, runs 2 or 3
Yes.
every issue. It's really dwindled for many, many reasons. Number one, the mailing rates on these magazines have escalated so much it becomes increasingly more costly to mail these out to people.
Right.
Their subscribers, they live and die by the subscribers in
Right.
the magazines. They switch to television or the internet, you know.
Right.
Paper in general. I don't have to tell you about paper. They're chopping down woodlands all over the world.
Sure,
As a result, paper is more expensive. So it's really bad times for the cartoonist. That's why I suggest anybody thinking of it seriously, there are still greeting cards, which are very good.
Right.
Magazines are kind of sketchy, if you'll pardon the pun.
Yeah.
I would advise anybody that's seriously thinking about it to get to a good computer graphics course and pick it up from there. Because whether this printed page cartoon that we know now is going to be around for the next 20 years, I don't know.
Right.
Sadly, as it sounds.
You know, every once in a while, I guess everybody's had this experience, have thought, hey, I have a great idea for a cartoon. I bet I could make a great cartoon out of that.
Right.
And this was my idea. My idea was that you have the Countess Dracula and you have Count Dracula. And the caption reads is that the Countess says, or the caption reads is that the Countess is not going out with the Count tonight because she has too big a stake in him. Oh! I know, anyway, we'll cancel that as a cartoon.
Not bad, though. Needs a special market.
Right, a special market for that.
A vampire magazine.
Right. But you know, sometimes I see cartoons where they just sort of specialize. A whole cartoon book will be just on cats.
Right. Yeah.
Or a whole cartoon book will be just on dogs. They sort of specialize.
That's another outlet that I'm glad you brought up.
Yeah.
Because that's sort of coming up. Rather than the sporadic one cartoon in a magazine, the artists are now going and finding anything that has one subject and putting out a book on it.
I see. One theme, they follow that theme all the way through.
Some of it can be gimmicky. Dick.
Right.
I often told my wife, I said, I've got an idea for a cartoon book that'll make a mint. And Betty will say, what is it? I said, Britney Spears' favorite cartoon. Whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, the kids are going to buy it.
Oh, you bet.
Make a fortune.
Hot stuff.
Right.
Now, you've been involved yourself in a book.
Right.
Okay. And Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. It evolved from a friend of mine by the name of Jim Rush. Nice guy, tennis player. He belonged to one of the tennis clubs in Bayside, Queens. And he came up with the idea that he says, you know what's very big today? The baby boomers. I mean, every month there are 10,000 new baby boomers that come into baby boomdom, if you want to call it. And he says there are so many 50, 55-year-old guys that are looking in the mirror all of a sudden. What happened to me? I was a kid 5 years ago, and they're morphing into middle age.
Right.
And he says it's such a lucrative field. So he came up with this idea, Dick, and the idea was a baby boomer's guide on how to handle middle age.
How to handle middle age.
Yeah, how to cope with middle age.
Right.
And he says, I can come up with the writing part of it. He says, but I need a cartoonist, a guy to run with the cartoonist.
The whole thing is on a very humorous type of...
That's right.
He's not philosophical in any way.
Oh, no. All humorous.
Humor.
And we came up with it. It's very tough to get a publisher. We came up with an internet publishing company. They put it out. If I may show you.
Sure, let's take a look at it.
It's called The Baby Boomer's Guide to Coping with Middle Age. By the way, it can be got through www.firstbooks.com.
Okay.
But anyway, it's a funny little book, and it runs the gamut of what to do if you're losing your hair, what to do with women, what to do with women who are having hot flashes, clothes that you don't wear anymore, you don't bother with. And it's just a funny glance at how to cope with the advancing years and what you can do about it.
Okay. Those are all your cartoons in there?
All my cartoons.
Oh, wonderful.
Sure.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay. That's so good. I'm wondering about Americans as have a lock on cartooning. I sort of thought that they did historically. I know now it's sort of waning a little bit, but at one time Americans, I thought, had a lock on that. Now, how about other countries? There are other countries, I assume England would, I assume Italy would, I assume France would, and so on.
Oh, sure.
But how far does it go? Do we get into, the Middle East, China, the Orient? Do we have any cartooning being done there?
Well, China, they have sort of a restrictive government there. They hold the reins over everything economical and anything you want to do. So it's a little tougher in China. I'm not saying that they don't have them, but it's not as out in the open as most other countries. I'm going to mention a British magazine that was New Yorker before New Yorker was New Yorker, and that was Punch magazine.
Oh, yes, I've seen copies of Punch.
Some of the greatest cartoonists that ever breathed were Punch magazine. Believe it or not, Russia, with its restrictive government, had a magazine. I don't know the Russian name, but transcribed into English, it was called Alligator. Okay,
Alligator.
Alligator, and
they don't have any alligator.
That's probably the funniest part.
Okay.
But anyway, they had some very, very fine cartoons, and they managed to sneak them in under the commissar's.
Is that right?
Yeah, door. And they were very, very funny. I'm sure Berlin in Germany puts out a couple of good cartoon magazines. Of course, the language is a barrier. And stores, certainly, that market them, we find very hard to get to.
Yes.
But they're out there, and a lot of them are very, very funny. There are some very fine Mexican cartoonists, very fine, funny guys that are well known internationally. You just mentioned them by their last name. And, all through South America, they know about them, and they're revered. So it is a global thing.
Right. So they would stay within their own realm.
Yeah.
Okay. But also they would also be international if they could.
That's right.
Right. They'd be international if they could.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have another cartoon you could show us? Can you show us another cartoon?
Sure.
Because I just love looking at them.
Plenty more.
And
okay. We've seen this. We've seen that. I always thought this was funny to have a butterfly, Dick, that, in other words, you put in your own colors by the number.
So, you wonderful. Okay, you're cool. I love the monarch butterfly too. I know all the colors too, black and orange and so on, like that.
Yes,
Wonderful.
and also there's the old camel on the desert that, you know, holds water for so many days. That would make
Are those gallons left?
yeah, that would make it easier. Well, okay.
Okay.
What was interesting at AP, Dick, we had to do cartoons that couldn't be illustrated with a photograph. And writers, very fine writers, would write a story on dieting, which would be hard to take a photograph, it'd be rather dull. Sid Moody wrote a story, one of our fine writers, tracing the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants in America.
Oh.
Jack, come up with a cartoon. Now, that's a hard one to come up with. And I came up with this one, Dick. I don't know, can you read it?
Oh, God. Oh, look at that. Wonderful.
And there's just a Nina's looking down saying, wasps.
So good. Jack, we're running out of time. I wish we could stay. Would you come back again?
I'd love to.
Because there's so many things that we
Anytime,
can
anywhere.
cover.
It's been a gas.
Pleasure to have you. Good.
Thank you for having me, Dick.
Right. Thank you so much for coming. That's our show for today. I'm Dick Mahon for Neighborhoods Today, and thank you for watching.